Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Gregory Wilpert, coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. Brazil's former president Lula da Silva accepted the chief of staff position in current President Dilma Rousseff's cabinet today. The reason Lula took this position is that as a member of the president's cabinet, he will enjoy temporary and limited immunity from prosecution, now that the lead prosecutor in Brazil's wide-ranging corruption investigation charged Lula with money laundering and non-disclosure of assets. As if matters could not get worse, the governing PT and its leaders, Dilma Rousseff and Lula da Silva, have been accused by a former senator or head of the Congress, actually, of being aware of the corruption scandals in the oil company Petrobras. This is the first time that someone so close to these two leaders has implicated them quite directly in the corruption scandals. With us today is Joao Feres Jr., a political science professor at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. He's also head of the Laboratory for Media and Public Sphere Studies and has published extensively on the media, politics, and race relations in Brazil and in the US. Thanks, Joao, for joining us again.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So let's start with actually the protest that happened last weekend. There were massive demonstrations against President Rousseff. I saw estimates ranging from several 100,000 protesters to several million in all of Brazil, in several hundreds of cities in Brazil. Supposedly the largest demonstrations in recent Brazilian history. Also, opinion polls say that Dilma Rousseff has become extremely unpopular. So first, explain to us, would you say that these images that we get from the international media, is that true? Is she really this unpopular? And if so, what are the reasons behind it? Is it the economy and corruption, or is there more to it?
I think that, the international media, from, at least what I see, is very much influenced by the Brazilian media and, the coverage of the Brazilian media, that the Brazilian media does of politics in general. And the Brazilian media is very much biased against Dilma Rousseff and the Workers' Party and Lula. They function mostly like an opposition party. So, but besides that, I mean, yeah, the demonstrations were at least, they were massive in some cities like São Paulo, and they have been traditionally massive in São Paulo in the last year. I mean, there were 4 demonstrations against her before. So, and in Brasilia, but other than that, I mean, the number of people who went to the streets this time was similar to the number of people who went to the streets in last year in March 13. So, and I think it's very important to realize that, the polls that were made during the surveys that were made during the demonstrations show that, there's a very particular profile of the people who attended demonstrations. I mean, I think 70% of them are above 36 years old, and also, they're, dominantly white. I think 80% is white, and 77% has, higher education, and they also have, an average income, which is much higher than the average income of the Brazilian population. So we're talking about here of an upper white middle class that is going to the streets to protest against Dilma and against PT. So it has become polarized along, a class, a social class divide.
And the reasons that they're going out to demonstrations, is it mainly the economic issues and the corruption issues, or is there something else behind it?
I think it's not the economic. The economy. It's mostly because of corruption. Because the media makes a big fuss about this corruption scandal and others too, and they cover it like 24 hours a day. 7 days a week. It's like they hammer it into their audiences. So people are really overwhelmed by this corruption coverage, and I think that many of them revolt against it. But it's interesting to notice that most people who do revolt against it are middle class. So the people who are touched by the social policies of the Workers' Party, they are not as much discontent with government as the middle class is.
Uh, Former President Lula da Silva is now also going to be receiving a sort of protection or immunity by being a part of the cabinet of Dilma Rousseff, and he's going to take the position of chief of staff. How do you think that this will affect Dilma's presidency? Will he be overshadowing her, considering that he enjoys a lot more popularity and also a lot more kind of, the legacy that she was his protege? Or do you think that will the troubles that Dilma Rousseff is facing rub off on Lula, so that might drag him down further, in addition to the problems he's facing with the prosecution right now?
It's not entirely correct to say that he's immune to be prosecuted. As a matter of fact, as a minister, he can be prosecuted by the Supreme Court. So, he's not above the justice system. The only thing that he escapes is the first degree judge that was, actually prosecuted, or actually threatening to prosecute him. And this judge, his name is Sergio Moro, has been using all sorts of paralegal and also illegal procedures in order to run this investigation of the corruption scandal. So I think that Lula was wise to escape his grasp and go onto the Supreme Court. If he's going to be judged by the Supreme Court, at least he has a chance of getting a more fair judgment than he would get from Moro. And I think that it was really wise of Dilma to actually make him minister, because Lula, Dilma's government was lacking political skill, the political skill to actually negotiate among the parties and to construct actually a majority in parliament. And I think Lula is the right guy to do that, because Lula is very popular, and politicians respect popularity. This is something that they really respect. So I think he has the clout to bring people together and to establish a conversation that Dilma wasn't able to do. And most of her political problems, come from her inability to actually construct around her, a political basis that will sustain her government.
This whole problem that the Rousseff government and now Lula, of course, are facing reminds me a little bit of the situation in Venezuela back in 2000, 2001, when the opposition was mobilizing a lot of demonstrations against the president. Of course, you can't directly compare the situation, but in terms of the class differences that you were talking about, still, they are facing some pretty serious corruption accusations, especially now that the former head of the Senate has come out to implicate both Lula and Dilma in at least in knowing about the corruption scandals in Petrobras. What do you think this means now for Brazilian politics? Can the government function at all, or is it being completely delegitimized? Also, a similar situation I think happened, perhaps, I'm not sure, in Argentina after the economic crash, when everybody said that we should get rid of the entire political class in Argentina. Is that the kind of situation we're facing, or is it really much more divided and class-based, like you were saying with the protests?
I'm not a specialist on Argentina or Venezuela, and I know there are similarities but also differences. What I can say about Brazil is that you have to have in mind that, for example, just going back to this protest and people who are very angry at government, the social movements that are behind this organization, these protests, are really right-wing movements here, and many of them are even sponsored by foreign money, mostly from the U.S. and even from the Koch brothers. So what we're talking about here is a right-wing movement. So it's not that the people are in the streets protesting and the whole political system is delegitimized. But on the other hand, the only media we have in Brazil right now, is the right-wing media. So this opposition party that we have that works like a media, or a media that works as an opposition party. So yeah, I mean, they managed to construct this climate of lack of legitimacy. But I think there is something very thin. Once the political system, starts to function again, and if Lula is able to do that, I think most of this heat actually goes away.
One of the, of course, this is one of the main issues, like I mentioned earlier, is also the economic problem. The fact that Brazil faced a recession in 2015 that looks like is going to continue in 2016. Do you think that this is something that that Lula will be able to turn around? I mean, given that he's now going to have a larger role in the government and perhaps a different economic approach. I heard that he disagrees perhaps with Dilma's policies, economic policies so far.
I think the economic crisis we're facing now is partially politically induced. So, for example, businessmen, stopped investing because they really did not like Dilma's policies and did not like her. And Lula, on the other hand, was very successful in bringing businessmen, to the table and having conversations and projects and plans to, make them invest and to make the economy grow too. So, of course, I think that Dilma also made very poor choices in terms of economic policy in the past. So that has also contributed to the economic crisis we're facing now. But I think that, if the political climate improves, there is a good chance that the economic climate also will improve, that will at least, fend most of the crisis that we're facing now.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I would love to invite you again so we can continue this conversation and this analysis. So thanks so much, Joao, for having joined us.
Sure, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.